Hello, I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express, and as always, I hope you enjoy the journey ahead. Belarus is about to become the launch pad for Russia's newest intermediate-range ballistic missile system, the Oreshnik, a weapon with a reach spanning the entire European continent. Minsk and Moscow insist this is a joint deterrent, a purely defensive shield against Western militarization. But when you study how this system is built, deployed, commanded and prepared for combat duty, a different picture emerges. One where Belarus is not a shield, but a forward staging ground for escalation. And as the December deployment nears, one thing becomes very clear. Lukashenko may talk about shared decision-making, but the Kremlin holds the keys to this arsenal. Nevertheless, if Oreshnik is fired, Belarus will share the political blame, absorb the military retaliation, and gain precisely zero real control. On this episode, we break down how this missile system changes the security landscape of Eastern Europe. Without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out.
Belarus and Russia continue to be best friends forever. Alexander Lukashenko in particular has been very boastful about the new toys his senior partner has given him. Lukashenko has said that Russia's top-of-the-line Oreshnik missile will be deployed and combat-ready in Belarus this month. He says that they're meant to slap down threats from neighboring countries should anything go south. A much more aggressive rhetoric than the one he used a couple months ago when asked about the missiles.
There is no aggression involved, nothing at all. The deployment of these weapons in Belarus is nothing more than a retaliatory measure to the escalating situation in the region and current threats. Please, let's move on from this.
The Oreshnik missile's presence is yet another example of Belarus and Russia working together militarily. Although the missile itself is somewhat shrouded in mystery, it is currently unknown whether the weapon was used during the recent Zapad 2025 military exercises. Despite all of the threats being lugged around by both Minsk and Moscow, the Oreshnik missile has only been used once during the war in Ukraine, when one was used to strike the city of Dnipro.
And now we're zoning in on the East-splaining portion of our show. Over the course of the war in Ukraine, both sides have been advancing military technology in various fields. For Russia, one of the most crucial areas has been missile technology, and the Oreshnik is regarded by Moscow as the top of the tops.
The Oreshnik is an intermediate-range ballistic missile produced by the Russian military. Its most touted feature is its speed, which reportedly reaches over 12,000 kilometers an hour. It also carries special ballistic missile payloads, which can host several warheads, a feature previously seen only in nuclear weapons. According to reports, these are supposedly very difficult to intercept, a claim that Russian leadership itself has often echoed when talking about the weapon. When referring to the Oreshnik, Moscow has been adamant that no Western anti-missile system is capable of intercepting it. Vladimir Putin himself has offered NATO a kind of missile duel, which would put these words to the test. Though, of course, the Western allies have not agreed to this proposal. What's more, it remains unknown how many of the missiles there actually are. It hasn't been used very often, only once in combat, and is often absent from large-scale Russian military drills. The transfer of the Oreshnik missile system to Belarus may also be merely smoke and mirrors, with the system actually being sent without the missiles themselves. This is a commonly used deterrence tactic, often employed by Minsk and Moscow.
And now, as always, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. In Belarus right now, something both old and new is unfolding. A Cold War-style deployment dressed up in very 2025 messaging. Officially, we are told this is a joint Union-state deterrent, a response to so-called Western militarization. Belarusian officials insist the intentions are defensive. But everything about the Oreshnik's deployment pattern, command and control structure, and combat readiness regime signals offensive potential. You do not send mobile IRBM units to patrol the countryside of an allied state merely to reassure your own population. You sent them there to shorten flight times, complicate adversary detection, and create a launch environment that pressures NATO and Ukraine at the same time. Alexander Lukashenko has framed the move as a reaction to alleged Western escalation. Estonia acquiring South Korean arms, Latvia building a Rheinmetall ammunition plant, Germany stationing the 45th Tank Brigade in Lithuania, that sort of thing. That narrative is tidy, but incomplete. And that is because while Belarus points fingers at NATO, Moscow is quietly preparing itself for scenarios where conflict intensifies on either the Ukrainian or the NATO front. The fact that Russia retains authorization authority, operational control and targeting responsibility for Oreshnik speaks volumes. The firing code belongs to the Kremlin. That, more than anything Minsk says, tells us what this system is really for. Now, look at the military structure being built to house this system. 60 kilometers south of Minsk, at a site near Pavlovka, a massive new complex is taking shape. Ammunition storage buildings, 100-meter-long hangars, foundations for command facilities, and cleared forests for mobility corridors. This is a permanent operational hub designed for regular combat patrols, resupply and rapid launch readiness, and it sits atop a location with a deep, decades-long history of hosting Soviet missile regiments. And now Belarus is being rewoven into Russia's strategic infrastructure. Now, for Europe, the arrival of Oreshnik shifts the security equation. With a range of 5,500 kilometers, these missiles could reach nearly every European capital. Their mobility complicates tracking, and their presence on Belarusian soil raises one difficult but inevitable strategic question. How do you defend against an IRBM launched from so close to NATO's eastern flank? Now, to blunt Oreshnik's effectiveness, you need early phase interception, the kind provided by existing NATO missile defense sites in Poland and Romania. And also, you need counter-strike assets positioned to hit Oreshnik launchers during their pre-firing phase. Deterrence only works when the opponent believes you can neutralize their weapon before it becomes lethal. Belarus says it is deterring aggression. What it is actually doing is offering its territory as the front row seat in a confrontation it itself cannot control. And when the missiles roll out in December, the rest of Europe will be watching, because in a crisis, the line between deterrent and threat is drawn not by rhetoric, but by the range, readiness, and command authority of the weapons themselves. And now, here to shed more light on the issue is Alina Koushik, Editor-in-Chief at Belsat TV. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Thank you for having me.
So, all that talk about nuclear weapons and about the Oreshnik, to what extent is this simply Lukashenko and Putin by extension? It's a bluffing.
It's not bluffing.
How much substance is there to these threats?
We have two levels on what this topic is working. First is the domestic level to threaten people. This is one, but very significant one. And the other one is geopolitical level. We remember that in 2024, Putin announced mirroring actions when we knew that some strategic new weapons will be passed in Germany.
So trying to blame the West for this, right?
Exactly, that was. So that was the moment then the talk about Oreshnik and Belarus started. That's why it is important to understand that it's not just a bluff. It's a part of strategic game against the West at the moment. But what is important to understand now? Oreshnik is not in Belarus now. They announced to have it in December 2025. We still have December 2025, and no information about Oreshnik in Belarus. Moreover, Lukashenko's press secretary announced that Lukashenko will tell when Oreshnik will be in Belarus in the next People's Annual Assembly. Still waiting. Lukashenko said that Oreshnik will be in Belarus, then Russians will produce one more Oreshnik. What also we know about this system? This is like an upgrade of old Soviet system. It can be used with a nuclear, like a nuclear weapon, but also as a tactical weapon.
The conventional, right? Conventional warhead.
What we saw actually in Ukraine, because Oreshnik was used once. just to show that, yes, we've got it, and to threaten the West as well.
Some analysts were not really impressed. I mean, back then, I'm not even sure if it had actual warheads. Some people said it had dummy warheads. It was just a demonstration of the carrying capacity as such. But how much does it change, really, when it comes to the defense and security calculus in Europe? Since naturally, the one problem that is there, regardless of the warhead, is the range, about 5,000 kilometers. That puts pretty much all targets within continental European NATO within reach, right?
Exactly. That's why, for Russia, it's not important to have Oreshnik exactly in Belarus, because they can reach Europe even from territory of Russia. But for Lukashenko, having nuclear weapon is one of his political goals. That's why I think he's trying to insist and to persuade Putin to have Oreshnik in Belarus.
Isn't this a double-edged sword? I mean, if missiles are launched during any sort of conflict involving NATO countries from Belarusian territory, especially if one assumes that it was Minsk and not Moscow calling the shots, then retaliation will hit Belarus first. Is this a wise approach from the standpoint of Moscow? Now, trying to imagine like what's on their mind.
This is the Russian strategy. Remember, then the war started. From which territory Russian troops went to Ukraine?
Well, it was Belarus, but that was also convenience. I mean,
it was convenience.
Shorter distance, right?
Shorter distance, but it was from Belarus. So now, if this missile, they can, start from Belarus, it will be Belarus, not Russia. This is very convenient situation to Moscow, because we know that Russian diplomacy loves to say which is not true. Remember Crimea? They said, no, that's not me. Green man, it's not me. Donbass, not us. That's why I think that it might be situation more or less the same. And for me, there are some parallels with Polish Nazi camps.
So-called, non-existent.
So-called, of course, yes, so-called. That's why Nazis built these camps in Poland. And now, so many years passed, and still Poland have to say that it's not true. There would be Nazi camps built in Poland, but not, for Poles. So this is the same for Belarus. Russia is using territory of Belarus in the war at the moment. Maybe not for conventional war, but using territory for preparing the next stage of the war. And I believe that this is intensifying at the moment, and our experts are alarming that Belarus is a part of the war. They are supporting the Russian army. They are making parts of the different kind of missiles and different kind of weapons.
Taking part in hybrid warfare as well, right?
Optics for drones, for example. Yes. So
hybrid warfare is another thing, right? I mean, they have been
war is completely
sending
another war.
People to the borders of Poland and the Baltics, and once again, it's coordinated with Russia. But I've one other question concerning like a possible scenario. Let's assume that there is some sort of attack launched from Belarus. It is no longer possible to pretend that these missiles were fired by accident or anything. There is a confrontation. Now, we are always thinking about, okay, how to secure our territories, but there is the question of Kaliningrad, naturally, because it is a rather small exclave with little strategic depth to it, so it like mirrors the situation of the Baltic states. But then there is Belarus. Doesn't Moscow realize that if there is a conflict, if potentially NATO forces go into Belarus, possibly topple the Lukashenko regime, people might not be willing to fight and to die for Lukashenko. So Russia could end up losing Belarus altogether. Don't they realize this? That, in their calculus and trying to draw up these, war plans?
They do understand that Belarusians are not willing to die for Putin. And this is very important.
It's a bit of a risk for them, isn't it, right?
Of course, yes. But you have to understand that at the moment Belarus is totally controlled by Russia, by Russian army, Russian generals, Russian security forces, Russian special agents, and so on. And yes, Belarus is still an independent country on the map, but de facto, especially in all these security areas, we are totally dependent.
And of course, I mean, during peacetime, for posturing, this is great, but during wartime, wouldn't essentially Russia risk losing that control very easily? Because, I mean, apart from the top-down system that they have, the structures, let's assume that this actually is subjected, to the stress test of military confrontation. Ordinary people might not be interested in trying to support this, right?
Now Lukashenko is preparing the society to the war, militarizing society, militarizing kids in school, and there are a lot of war propaganda that we have to fight for our independence and so on. But we all think that Russia is strong. But remember what Ukrainians did. Then they come to the territory of Russia and easily took a piece of it. So this shows that Russia cannot control even their own territory. That might be difficult for them also to control military Belarus, and that's why you can be right.
And do you think that at this stage we should really intensify our efforts to communicate more with ordinary people in Belarus? Because we are assuming, okay, so there are nuclear weapons potentially stationed there, so this is intended to preclude any sort of, not only invasion, but interference. Because if you have nuclear weapons, you don't mess with a country that has nuclear weapons. Should this work as a deterrent towards initiatives aimed at, fostering what is left of civic society in Belarus? All those people still believe in freedom, and they don't want to give it up.
Having nuclear weapon is one point. Another point, who is controlling this nuclear weapon? I believe that Putin will not give the control under the nuclear weapon in Belarus to Lukashenko. So this is a completely different story. As for Belarusian society, we all should divide ordinary Belarusians from Lukashenko's regime, because people in Belarus, definitely more than 1/3 of population are not supporting Lukashenko. There are some 1/3 of population which they say we are apolitical. What does it mean apolitical in Belarus? That doesn't mean that you are afraid to say what you really think about. And now it's about less than 30% of population who is really supporting Lukashenko's politics. And we still know that most of the people who were in the streets in 2020, they're still in Belarus. They're still waiting for the moment for Belarus to become a normal country, to have possibility for free and democratic elections, which is the goal also of Belarusian democratic forces.
Do you think there is a risk that analysts in the West are making the mistake of saying, okay, if the situation in Russia is what it is, like most people, many people support the war there, there is not much resistance, and that they might be, essentially putting Belarus into the same basket, making the same assumptions, whereas the situation there, the public opinion is the way people think, very different, right? I mean, there is not much support of the war to start with, unlike in Russia.
Yes, most of the population in Belarus, they are not supporting the war. They are not supporting participants of Belarusian army in the war in Ukraine, even more. But Belarusian society is ready for changes. And this is a huge gap between Belarus and Russia. That's why I think that there is a mistake to think that changes in Belarus will come, then Russia will change. Because I'm not sure then Russia can change. But what I know, because I know Belarusian society, I know Belarusians, that we can quickly change Belarus, because Belarus is ready for changes. We don't have open war conflicts also on our territory. So it's much easier, to provide some reforms and make the country on a democratic way. But we all know how difficult geopolitical situation is. We know about new game of Washington and how nice there are talks between Washington and Moscow. And Lukashenko is a part of this game. That's why it is so important also to support Belarusian democratic forces and not to lose in this game Belarus.
And hopefully this is not something that's going to be forgotten, despite, as you said, the shifting geopolitical reality that we're seeing today. Alina Koshik was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you.
And now we move on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. Now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says that any concessions of territory to Russia will be decided by the Ukrainian people in a referendum. Territorial concessions have been one of the most hotly debated topics surrounding a possible peace deal.
The Ukrainian leader believes that the issue of territorial concessions to Russia as part of a peace deal should be resolved either through a popular referendum or through national elections. Such a vote would be difficult to hold, however, given the currently imposed martial law and ongoing conflict. These remarks come as Zelensky is reportedly being pressured by the United States to move forward with a peace agreement that would settle the war with Russia. Such concessions are seen as a crucial part of a deal that would be favorable for Moscow. Russia has been demanding Ukraine withdraw from the Donbass region, but Ukraine has rejected the idea of giving it up entirely. The idea to create some kind of demilitarized zone in the Donbass has also been floated.
A recent report by the Molfar Intelligence Institute shows that Russia is using European SIM cards to upgrade its Shahed drones. Russian forces have apparently been buying SIM cards from European operators to be able to carry out necessary upgrades.
SIM cards play a crucial role in the way that drones are used. Given access to civilian networks, they can send back speed, location, altitude and even photos to their operators, which in turn helps them evade air defense systems and even make their strikes far more accurate. Russian engineers had reportedly tested these upgrades in different countries, mainly in Kazakhstan and Turkey, before deploying the enhanced drones against Ukraine. What's more, the list of the sources of the SIM cards matches the countries in which unidentified drones violated airspaces in late 2025. This has in turn raised fears of these drones being used to target the affected countries. Access documents show that Russia has been carrying out an ambitious long-term plan to buy thousands of activated SIM cards registered to real people. Russian operatives later traveled abroad undercover to test the equipment.
Ukrainian authorities are warning that Russia is building up its military presence in the Moldovan breakaway region of Transnistria. There are fears that Moscow will use these forces to target the coastal city of Odessa.
In Transnistria, Russia has reportedly been mobilizing reservists into local armed groups and has been ramping up the presence of various military equipment, such as drones. It has also been setting up training centers in an attempt to vastly strengthen its position in the region. Kiev believes that Russia will use these new forces to carry out sabotage operations or even small-scale attacks, which will divert the attention of the Ukrainian army. Although a large invasion from the region on Odessa is not expected, experts warn that even minor operations may have a large influence on the war's outcome. Russia has also been enacting a wide-scale disinformation campaign in the region, most likely to affect the outcome of next year's unrecognized presidential elections in Transnistria.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates.